All right. Hello, everyone. It's 2 minutes past 2, so I'm going to get started. Welcome to the Meteor Impact afternoon session, European time. My name is Bergland. I'm going to talk about something called, let's see if I can switch to the right screen. TypeScript internationalization, which is a tool-free pattern for localization, or translation rather. Warning first, if you're expecting to hear a lot about Meteor, this is a Meteor-free presentation in that it's a general TypeScript-based pattern rather than NPM package for your in-application translation of texts. I'm going to start with a little about me. So my name is Per. I live in Gothenburg, Sweden. It's on the west coast. I'm currently working as CTO and main developer of RefApp, which is a digital reference check SaaS service during recruitment. So we provide a service that lets recruiter manage the reference checks via web forms instead of having to book phone calls, call up referees or references as they're called in the US, and ask them questions about a candidate applying for a job. There are some contact details on the slide there. Welcome to contact me if you have questions about the contents or anything. I'm also present on the Meteor Slack, mostly present in the async and TypeScript channels. But you can also find me on Twitter and GitHub with my handle Per Bergland. So to give proper context, I inherited the code base that is currently the RefApp service a little over 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And in March 2019, this is the code base I inherited when it came to text in the system. The system supported 2 languages, Swedish and English, and it was pretty much pretty hard coded. There was some kind of pattern in place, but I realized that to be able to grow further, I needed to come up with a more scalable approach to handling texts in the system. Now, I've seen some systems in the past. Obviously, I'm that old, so I had some requirements and scouted around for something that fulfilled my requirements. So this is what I wanted. I wanted the source code where the text was displayed to have the English text as much as possible, so that it was obvious what the core English text was without having any code names or code numbers of any sort. I wanted it to be scalable to many languages. And a third requirement that I added was I didn't want this to have an extra build step, because what I'd seen in the past when it comes to internationalization packages of various sorts in Java, .NET, JavaScript, is that many of them have something like this, where you have a code in some kind of dictionary of sorts, maybe nested dictionary, as in this place here. This is the, I don't even remember which package this was. But this is I've seen this pattern in many places where you have a code for each string, and you need to understand what that code is, and often you need to look it up even to understand, oh, this is the well, in this case, this is the app name, but often cases it's not so obvious what the text is, or what the code means, and where it can be used and what purpose it has. So I didn't want that. Also, I didn't want an extra build step, because I've found that it's so easy to forget about invoking that build step if it's not automatic. Of course, you can set up some kind of watch-based system to build these stub files from some source package automatically, but I wanted something that was, just source code, really. I wanted source code, and I wanted it to be managed like source code in Git, and then have tooling around updating that source code. By the way, welcome everybody who's joined. Feel free to raise your hand at any time, and I will try to answer questions in line if you have any. Otherwise, there's a Q&A session towards the end of the session. So this is the kind of outcome. This is what we have in production today in the RefApp system. It is React-based front end, but we also, of course, use a lot of texts in the server-side part as well, like when sending emails, for instance, to referees and candidates that are entered into our system by our customers. So using the convention that you often see in these packages, T as in translate, as little Chrome as possible, in addition to the actual text. And whenever you type a string that isn't that doesn't exist in the translation dictionary, you'll get a TypeScript compilation error that, oh, this was maybe it's misspelled, as in this case, or maybe it just doesn't exist because you haven't entered it into the system. So that is the source code in both server and client. I'll show you later what T means. It's just a function. It's nothing magic about it at all. And then the different translation dictionaries to the right here, just excerpts from the Swedish to English dictionary, which is the base dictionary. In this case, English to Finnish and English to German for the same texts. And this has been very successful. Actually, it's we've scaled to a lot of text in the system. I'm going to come back in a slide or two to problems with the current implementation and kind of challenges for the future. But all in all, it's been a very nice experience building it this way instead of trying to use some other package, because I couldn't find one that I liked. Going back to how I built it, so there are some, maybe these are your, this is your context as well. Maybe you share these, you know, the state we're in. Maybe you don't, but in our case, we are native Swedish speakers working, or at least I am, but I'm also pretty proficient in English. So I decided pretty obvious choice is to have English as the core language, to have the base language be English, but also to always have Swedish translation right away for each English term in the system. So the English to Swedish translation forms the basis or the pattern for all other languages to adapt to. I built in something like a section-based system for some kind of modularity, specifically to know which modules are to be provided in all languages, like communication outbound to referees and candidates in the system. And some sections are only for internal users, for the user interface language we have in the product, which is a subset of the other languages. And then, as I mentioned, the English to Swedish translation objects, they provide the type for all of the language to adapt to. And I'm going to show you in a bit what that means. It's a very, it's a very standard thing to do, to take an object and the shape of the object turns into a type using the type of operator in TypeScript. And all the rest is just plumbing. It's just pretty basic stuff. But before I'm going to show you the actual source code, I'm just showing some patterns here from the source. And this is the open source project called Typescript-l8n. Sorry about that word, internationalization. And under my name, Bergland, as I mentioned in the first or the second slide there. And if you go to that URL there, you'll be open the project in the web-based Visual Studio Code, github.dev, very convenient thing. Tip for the future, if you don't know that already, if you press the period key on any GitHub page, that will open in the github.dev VS Code web-based editor. But the basics in the pattern is that you create your T function by invoking a certain other method that takes the section you want, in this case demo, and which target language you want. And then you use it in your code, whether it's server-based or React-based or Blazed or whatever have you. It's just this text takes the text that you write here and translates it into the target language. In this case, text in an inline React component, which is then found in the English to Swedish dictionary, translating to this Swedish sentence here, which is just a translation. And this scales well to many languages. And it also scales well to another situation I didn't mention in the slide, which is that you often don't want to wait for a full translation run for all your supported languages. So in our case, we decided to do the obvious thing, which is if there isn't a translation, then default to English. So the way we work is that we have employees that speak 3 or 4 languages, or maybe 5 even total. And then the rest of the languages we send over to a translation agency or Google Translate as a first step, and then send on to a translation agency for fix-ups. But it's a very convenient way to work. So time for a timeout. So this is the screen. This is a source file that I took screenshots from. It shows some features of the pattern. One is here. So this is what I talked about, that the text to translate is provided by the instance of your main translation file, in this case, English to Swedish. So this object has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 entries, and that means that the keys of that type are those 5 texts. And then I just describe a type here, which is the translation type that take those keys and provide a new string. And then I just have a small switch statement to return the appropriate object back for to be used in translation. Another feature to point out here is that while it's preferable in many cases to have the text itself be the key, obviously this pattern also allows for code-based, like a code source string. So if you have a very long text, you might want to also, for English, have a lookup from that code to a longer text here. So that works fine as well. There's nothing prevents you from doing that. So this is, again, it's a very small example, but if I go back to the app itself, let's look at this here, which is just a little code. So in this case, this is again the screenshot I was showing earlier. So this is text in an inline React component. So some nice features here, again, just provided by the default TypeScript implementation in VS Code. If I don't know what keys exist, then I can just control space and it will suggest the keys in my object. Text in an inline React component. Boom. If I mistype the text, I immediately get a compilation error, so that I know that, oops, I misspelled it, or maybe it doesn't exist and I need to add it to the dictionary. So this is, again, this is in the GitHub open source project. It just shows you some patterns on what to do here. And on top of the implementation, I also added a mustache rendering so that we can have replacement strings in the text as well. But that's that's for you to decide whether you want to use mustache or some other library to interpolate text into your different, interpolate in values of various sorts into your text. Let me check if I have that anywhere. No, I'm not using that feature anywhere. One particularly a good pattern to use we've found is to use mustache comments. So if I am unsure about a translation, and maybe I'm using Google Translate or preferably DeepL, which has much higher quality, then I might get a first attempt at a translation, but maybe I want to send that out to an expert. So then we use the mustache comment syntax and a convention So this is all the curly brackets here with the exclamation mark. That's just mustache mustache syntax for a comment. It'll when you render this whole string with mustache, this thing just disappears without any trace. So you're left with your proper translation that you guessed at, but you can still send this on to someone expert who is better in Swedish than maybe you are. But that's just a convention, something you can do, not necessary. I'm going to switch back to the presentation. All right. Questions on the demo before I leave VS Code? Any hands? I see no hands. All right. So where are we now, 3 years later? So in our service, we now support 8 core languages. That is the language for the logged in persons in the system, recruiters. And we have 16 sections of different sizes in the system of code, of translations. And then in addition to that, we have 15 non-core languages where we just translate maybe 25 or less than 25% of our texts, those that are targets, the referees and candidates that only have a limited experience to the user interface and communication from the system. These are the languages we support. Some obviously are very similar, like the only difference between English US and the built-in English, which is more of a UK English, is that we replace the word referee, which is the preferred term in UK and Ireland, with reference, which is a preferred term in the US. So that's just again, taking the dictionary that we have and just doing a regex search replace of the text. But then there are some trickier languages. If you ever worked with Hebrew, you know that like Arabic is right to left, which introduces some challenges, especially in VS Code that doesn't support right to left strings. But to work around that, we use Excel as our kind of export import format. So we built some, again, very simple tooling around interchange via Excel files. So we have in our back office part of our system, we have a way to extract all translations into an Excel file. And then that using Excel.js package, very good package. And that export also adds a, what's it called, conditional formatting to the exported file, so that all cells that have the text needed end curly bracket gets highlighted in green, so that we can send this off to some translator somewhere and tell them to look at the green stuff, fix them, and send us this file back. And then we have a bash script that just uses JQ and CSV kit, good tools, to convert back to JSON and then back to TypeScript source code with some prettier formatting as well. So that's what I mentioned earlier, that we use the mustache comments for tagging texts so that we can give some instructions to the translator. And sometimes that instruction is not that we need retranslation, but also could be the context of the word. For instance, sometimes in English or Swedish, the same word is used as a verb or a noun, but that obviously doesn't scale to all languages. So sometimes we just do curly bracket, verb, and then annotate the source text so that the translator know, oh, I'm going to translate the verb version of that word into Polish, Portuguese, what have you. So I mentioned I'm going to mention some problems towards the end here. So now comes the problems. Again, this has been working swell, as I mentioned. One problem using just static code like this is that the translation bundle or this subdirectory of source is now 2 megabytes, which means that every client, even those that don't use every language, obviously, or all sections, will get an additional 2 megabyte bundle, additional 2 megabytes in the bundle just to visit a page. That's, as you can see, maybe sometimes maybe like 40% of our entire bundle size is now all these texts. What could you do? I'm not sure. I was thinking about asynchronous load, so that in the source code using the lazy load import that's supported by Meteor, or some other pattern. But yeah, it's not obvious what to do without breaking all the code. But now that we're gonna need to move all code to be async anyways, maybe that's a good strategy to try to load it. Meteor doesn't really have the ability, like in Webpack, which is a pro and con, to be able to mark certain files as belonging to a bundle and serve them lazily. But at least you can do it on a, I think, per file basis. I only ever used lazy load for packages so far, so I don't know how well it works with source code files. And then obvious things like the tooling itself, since it's just source code and there's no tool, there's also no tool to easily introduce new entries when you have 23 language files, or 21, I think it is, to add to. But just some good strategies to do a search and replace across many files at once. It works okay, and just adding a new entry below one that already exists, and it's worked pretty fine. So we're very happy with this. Gonna round off with great minds think alike feature or aspect is that we stumble upon a very similar package that's called typesafe internationalization, and you have the GitHub pages for that package there. I think it's GitHub, could be something else, but it's very similar in style, and it's not a 100% match, but it's very similar. Yep. And that wraps up the talk of today. Now I don't know how this works really, because I haven't done it so far, but if you have any questions, shoot.
So hello.
Hi,
I'll
Jan.
be joining here, hey Per. Joining here to kind of help facilitate if people have any questions. If you can either write it in the chat, or you can use the Zoom feature to so-called raise your hands, and then we'll be happy to invite you on our virtual stage. So far in the chat, we have been me and Jan Kuster discussing the different options. I say for myself, actually, last weekend I did face, looking at my bundle numbers and everything. So I did do async load for the languages. So that means that it only loads the languages that's currently requested, which works pretty fine. It's been a little bit more troublesome to apply that for the server, how to do it there. So I have to kind of rethink how I'm doing the entire implementation there. I'm using, on the front end, I'm using React INTL, so I kind of need to use the internals for that on the server and kind of build what the components provide me myself. So I had to get back into the nitty-gritty of that and figure how to work that well. But in the end, it worked out, so that works. And Jan Kuster, he went with the other method, which means pretty much getting, dynamically importing the specific language and for that particular page, which is another thing that I plan to do in the future as our languages increases, to even load it based on the particular module that the person is using. So once they go into the workshop, it loads up or it adds to the language that they have on the front end the translation strings for workshop, and kind of bundles up depending on which module they go to.
Yeah, I have may realize one thing they're also looking for is also if there's anyone in the audience that knows how to do this. So if using to kind of get the first attempt at translations, you often want to use Google Translate, or as I mentioned, DeepL is much better than Google Translate. Use DeepL for any language that Google Translate. Use DeepL for every language it supports, and only use Google Translate if you must. But one thing that neither of them can work well with is the mustache kind of placeholders. It messes them up.
Yeah, I had some success with certain languages with the same mustache placeholder, the mustache bracelet in DeepL. That it's kind of with some language. I think in Polish, it for most part it went well. That it recognized that this is something that you translate, but most of the time it tries to translate as well. So it depends on the structure that you're using. Have you been using Crowd.in for translations? That's what I'm using.
No, is that like a crowd-based kind of like Fiverr or something, or?
It can be crowd-based, but it's also you can have you kind of closed translations as well.
Yeah. No, we rely on our own staff for the core languages, and then we have a bureau, a kind of traditional language bureau that connects to a network of specialists. And we went that way because I guess it was convenient to have a project manager to be able to understand kind of our world and the special words that we use in our system that has HR terminology, which is convenient for someone to understand that as a middleman, rather than needing to explain that to all new persons that come in and have a stab at translating your very nerdy HR language sometimes.
Is that a local agency that you have used?
Yeah, it's a local agency,
okay.
So it's pretty expensive, but yeah, when something works well, even though it's expensive, it's hard to convince yourself to switch to something cheaper if you're not really starved on cash.
Fair point there. So again, reminder, if you have any question, write them into the chat. Also, if you would be so kind, in the description of the talk, there is survey links. And if you click on the Take Survey, you can give feedback to Per about his presentation and maybe what to improve or what was nice to hear about. One thing is you can also anonymize the the feedback you are giving. So if you didn't like something, you can anonymize yourself, and then it will be just shown as an anonymous user that has given that feedback.
All right, time to wrap up. Thank you, Jan, for inviting me, or almost forcing me, or whatever it was, but it was fun.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me.
Glad you like it, and I hope to see you next year as well.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Bye.